The Scarlet Peregrine LX-11 picked the worst possible patch of the Ravaloon Causeway to start bleeding shimmering coolant mist from the seams of its belly. High Envoy Ariane Selith of the Lycery Concorde watched her dashboard bloom with warnings amber, sigils stacking and multiplying like a chorus of accusations. Each one might as well have read, "You are not reaching the summit." She coaxed the limping craft onto the raised shoulder, where the black roadway hovered over wind-packed sand. The ship settled with a tired hydraulic groan, as if it, too, understood the insult of stopping here, beyond the windshield. The needle spires of Glasshaven glinted under a honey dusk close enough to taunt, distant enough to be impossible. 60 kilometers, perhaps, the same as 60 light years. When your engines were coughing and your comms were dead, Ariane stepped down into the desert air. Her diplomatic suit woven with faintly iridescent threads caught the sinking sun and scattered it into soft prisms across the sand. All around her stretched the Volcor wastes, rust-colored dunes broken only by the roadway's steel ribbon and the occasional solar mast. Standing like a lonely sentinel, above it all hung Cyrodium, the ringed giant, its pale bands smeared across the sky like brushstrokes. A reminder, she was nowhere near the tide world where she'd been born. Nowhere near the oceans whose rhythms had shaped Lycery culture for millennia. She checked her wrist comp. The screen returned nothing but a pulsing error. The Volcor wastes were infamous for mineral interference that scrambled conventional signals and turned distress calls into static. The irony tasted sharp. Ariane was the Concorde's chief architect of the Terran Accord initiative, tasked with smoothing the fragile relationship between humans and her commonwealth. She handled councils, cabinets, and trade coalitions with serene precision. Yet she couldn't summon a towed drone. She sat on the gritty shoulder beside her ship, boots dangling just over the sand. Her long hair pale gold with a faint opal sheen slid forward over her shoulders. She pressed to blue-tinged fingertips to her temples and tried to breathe through the tightness in her chest. She was meant to be in Glasshaven hours ago, to deliver opening remarks at the Planetary Commerce Congress, remarks crafted to steady alliances, nudge tariffs, and keep 5 years of careful work from collapsing into suspicion and embargoes. The human chancellor would be there, delegates from 12 districts watching closely, and every rival faction eager for any sign that the Concorde's envoy was unreliable. Instead, she watched coolant vapor curl out of her ship like the ghost of her career drifting away. "That's a really pretty ship," a small voice said. Ariane jerked upright. A human child stood a few paces away, perhaps 5 or 6, wearing a miniature environmental suit patched with mismatched panels. Tool pouches clung to his hips. A dusty scarf covered his neck. His hair was a dark, wild shock, and his eyes brown and bright held not a hint of fear. He pointed toward the LX-11. "It looks sick, though. It's leaking smoke." Ariane blinked. Children did not, in her experience, simply appear in deserts. "It is experiencing a mechanical complication," she managed, her Terran's standard shaped by Lycery melody. "Where did you come from?" He jabbed a thumb toward a faint service track branching off behind sun-bleached rocks. "I live over there." I come out to watch ships. Yours is the prettiest one I've seen. The big freight haulers are cool too. But they're cool in a different way. You watch ships alone? Ariane asked. Because the thought made her throat tighten. The boy nodded as if it were obvious. Dad knows. I stay on the safe side. I don't go near the fast lanes. He took 2 steps closer, tilting his head at the drifting mist. My dad can fix it. Ariane hesitated. Hope arrived in ridiculous packaging. A child in a too big suit standing in a signal-dead desert, offering solutions like candy. Your father repairs spacecraft, she asked. He fixes everything. The boy declared. Transports, loaders, air processors. Once he fixed Miss Rel's irrigation drones when they went bonkers and watered her roof. He giggled. He said the control board got crossed, and the drones thought her roof was a field. Despite herself, Ariane felt the faintest tug at the corner of her mouth. That does sound inconvenient. My name's Jace, he announced. Apparently deciding introductions were essential now. Jace Holden. I'm 5 3/4. What's your name? I am High Envoy Ariane Seleth of the Lycery Concord. Jace frowned like he was counting syllables. That's a lot. Can I call you Ari? No one had used a nickname for her since her clutch mother's passing decades ago. The casual intimacy should have felt rude. Instead, it struck a tender place she hadn't realized existed. You may, she said. Jace beamed. Okay, Ari, come on. I'll take you to Dad. He'll know what to do. He always does. He held out his hand. Among the Lycery, touch carried weight. Her people were sensitives, not mind readers, but empathic receivers who could feel emotional currents through skin contact. First touch was intimate, an open window into another being's inner weather. Lycery children learned boundaries early. Touch was offered carefully, not thrown like a rope to a stranger. But the boy's hand was steady, trusting, as casual as breathing. Ariane took it. The sensation washed through her, instantly simple. Bright feelings without the adult human tangles she'd studied in reports. Curiosity like sunlight on water. Excitement, warm and unguarded. Trust offered whole, without negotiation. And beneath it, a thin ache. The quiet absence of someone no longer there. Jace tugged gently. Dad's probably finishing the Varnal job. He always works late. Ariane rose, letting herself be led off the highway by a child who should have been impossible down a dusty track towards something she couldn't name. The workshop appeared behind the rocks, like a place half-remembered from a kinder dream. A sprawling compound of welded buildings and bolted extensions. A main bay tall enough to swallow a mid-sized freighter. Living quarters clinging to one side. A fenced yard scattered with the skeletal remains of vehicles awaiting resurrection. Solar collectors crowded every roof, drinking the last blush of day. Over the entrance, a hand-painted sign read, Holden repair and salvage if it flew once. It can fly again. A man emerged from the bay, wiping his hands on a rag that looked older than the settlement. Ariane had expected a wary elder hard-eyed, suspicious of alien insignia. Instead, the man was perhaps in his late 30s, sun-darkened. Skin, grey eyes sharp with a parent's instinctive scan for danger. His hair was cut short and practical. A smear of grease marked his cheek, unbothered by vanity. "Jace," he called, voice firm. "What have I told you about wandering?" Then he saw Ariane. His gaze flicked from her face to the Concorde emblem at her collar, then down to his son's hand clasped in hers. "Dad." Jace let go and ran to him, nearly vibrating. "This is Ari. She's important. Her ship's sick on the highway. I told her you can fix it." The man's expression shifted surprise, concern, and then something steady settled into place. "Competence. Your ship broke down," he said. More statement than question. "A coolant system failure." Ariane replied. "Thermal alarms, then pressure loss. It is 2 kilometers back." He nodded slowly. "LX-11." He grimaced. "These designs always hide the cooling manifold in the dumbest place. Save a sliver of space. Create a single point of failure." He shook his head with the tired irritation of someone betrayed by engineering trends. Pretty ships, miserable to maintain. "It was a Concorde Council gift," Ariane said, oddly defensive. "It is considered prestigious. Prestige doesn't help when you're stranded." He caught himself, as if remembering she was a diplomat, and softened slightly. "Sorry, I've seen 6 of these. Same failure every time." He wiped his hands again and extended one. "I'm Elias Holden, Ariane Selif." "Dad," Jace whispered loudly, tugging his sleeve. "Fix it." Elias glanced toward the fading sun, then back toward the highway, running invisible calculations. "I can look," he decided. "If the primary manifold cracked, I'll have to fabricate a replacement. Nobody stocks these fittings anymore." Ariane swallowed. "I am meant to be at the Glasshaven Congress." Elias's brow rose. "The Commerce Congress. You're that envoy." Recognition warmed his voice. "You negotiated the Sable Corridor tariff reduction." Ariane blinked. "People here know of that?" "Out here," Elias let out a short breath. "Everyone does. Before that deal, half the settlements were paying ruinous lane fees. When you pushed the rates down, small shops survived. Miss Rel's hydro farm survived. My parts orders stopped tripling in price." Ariane had spent years treating treaties like chess moves. Here, the same agreement was food on someone's table. "I am glad it helped," she said, and meant it with an unexpected sincerity. Elias's jaw set with quiet determination. "Right. I'll grab the hauler. Jace, go inside and get the emergency kit. The blue box." "The blue box is boring," Jace complained. "The blue box keeps people alive," Elias replied, ruffling his hair. "The red box is for fires." Jace sprinted off. Elias looked at Ariane. "I can't promise miracles. If it's a seal, maybe quick. If the manifold's cracked," he exhaled, "fabrication takes hours. Maybe tomorrow." Ariane should have felt panic. Instead, she felt an odd looseness, like the universe had snipped one thread of obligation, leaving her momentarily lighter. "The Congress lasts 3 days," she said. "If I arrive tomorrow for negotiations, only the opening remarks will be lost. Those sound important." "They are," Ariane admitted. "But diplomats are trained to adapt." Elias studied her, grey eyes thoughtful. "You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone sharper-edged, more political. He shrugged. The Concord envoys on feeds always look like they're wearing a mask. Ariane touched the emblem at her collar. She thought of years of training, of posture and cadence and controlled smiles, of the persona that had become so comfortable she sometimes forgot it wasn't her skin. "Perhaps I am tired of performing," she said quietly. Elias's mouth curved into a small, genuine smile. "Then you're in the right place. Engines don't care about masks." They rode back to the stranded ship in a battered holler that rattled like it was held together by determination. Jace chattered the whole way, narrating the desert, the solar masts, and the different kinds of ships like a miniature expert. The work took most of the night. Ariane learned Elias wasn't merely a mechanic. He spoke of systems with the ease of someone who'd studied engineering in orbital yards. Before grief rerouted his life, his partner Jace's mother had died, running a supply shuttle through a storm, a navigation surge, a canyon war. A story told too many times and still never making sense. Jace fell asleep in the holler seat eventually, limp with exhaustion. Without thinking, Ariane draped her thermal wrap over him. His small face relaxed immediately, trusting sleep like a gift. Under the ship, Elias worked with patient ferocity. When he spoke, it was practical. Pressure lines, stress points, heat differentials. Yet beneath the technical language, Ariane sensed the deeper reason he did this, because broken things could be made whole. And that was the closest he could get to arguing with fate. Most problems, Elias said from beneath the access panel, are just cause and effect. Something breaks, you find why. You make it not broken. Ariane sat on the cargo ramp, watching his boots shift. Does everything make sense to you? Elias Holden, silence. No, he said finally, voice muffled by metal. Her death didn't. No system explanation fixes that. The tool clanged, harder this time. Ariane stared out at the cold stars. On her world, grief was a long companion. Lycery lived long enough to accumulate losses like layers of sediment. In our philosophy, she said softly, repair is a form of hope. To mend what is broken is to insist the future still matters. The tool stopped. That's good, Elias said, and when he rolled out from under the ship, his expression was strange, as if her words had struck a sealed place in him. You should put that on your fancy diplomatic banners. It is from an old Lycery meditation, she replied. But yes, it is good. He held up the broken part, a cracked manifold split with an ugly stress fracture. He explained how heat cycling had weakened it, how the seal failed, how the coolant bled out until the ship's core screamed for mercy. I can build a replacement, he said, for hours if the fabricator behaves. You should rest. Ariane said. Elias glanced at Jace sleeping. Later, when dawn finally bruised the horizon, the new manifold slid into place cleaner welds than the original. Reinforced in spots the manufacturer had skimped, Elias tightened the last fastener and sat back on his heels, exhausted but satisfied. Try it, he said. Ariane climbed into the cockpit, hands suddenly trembling. She powered up, systems cycled. Temperature stabilized. Pressure held. The LX-11 purred. Arian let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding for hours. Outside, Elias leaned against the hull, arms crossed, when she stepped down. He looked relieved in a way he tried not to show. "You missed your opening," he said gently. "I did," Arian admitted, "but I will arrive for negotiations." And she hesitated, then surprised herself by adding, "I would like to repay you." Elias shrugged. "You pay when the ship flies. It flies. Then we'll talk." His eyes softened. "Come back to the shop. Jace will want to see you awake." Breakfast was slightly burned eggs and uneven toast. Jace insisted on helping, which mostly involved dramatic stirring and proud declarations of competence. Arian ate every bite as if it were a feast, not because it was perfect, but because it was offered with joy. She arrived in Glass Haven later that day, composed and luminous, delivering her remarks with polished calm as if she hadn't spent the night in a desert workshop, listening to a mechanic talk about the things he couldn't fix. The human chancellor frowned, then accepted her explanation when negotiations moved smoothly under her guidance. Yet her mind kept drifting back toward rust-colored dunes and a sign that promised resurrection. And she returned, once, then again, 3 days later, the next week, over and over, as if the desert track had become a tether pulling her toward a version of herself she hadn't allowed to exist. Elias never asked why she came. He simply made room for her in his world. A spare chair by the workbench, a plate. At the table, a quiet understanding that she could be Ari, not Envoy Selith. He showed her engines in various states of rebirth. She told Jace stories of tide cities and singing reefs. Elias laughed at her jokes once she learned how to translate them into human humor, and she groaned at his puns with a sincerity that made Jace howl with delight. For months into this unlikely orbit, the Lycery Council summoned her back for review. "How long?" Elias asked one night on the roof of his quarters, where they watched Cyrodiil's rings tilt across the sky. 3 months, Arian said. "Perhaps 4. Elias's voice went carefully flat. "And after that? The council decides my next assignment. So she might not come back." Arian turned toward him. "Among my people, a permanent bond is sealed by a ritual called the linking. It requires complete openness that's sustained long enough to share deep memory. No masks, no secrets." Elias let out a short laugh that sounded more like fear. "That sounds terrifying." "It is," Arian agreed. "And I have never offered it, not in my long life." She took a breath. "I'm telling you because I don't want to leave. Because your son trusts me, and that matters more than my titles. Because you have become essential." Elias reached for her hand. The contact flooded her his grief, his hope, his caution, and the love he'd been trying not to name. She felt her own loneliness echo back through him. Centuries of duty, a hunger for something real. "I don't know your rituals," Elias said hoarsely, "but I know Jace asks about you every day. You're gone. He drew you in school blue skin and told his teacher your family." Moisture blurred Arian's vision. Elias pressed a kiss to her fingers. Not knowing how intimate it was by Lycery standards, I'm a mechanic in the wastes. You're shaping to worlds. None of this makes sense. You told me systems make sense if you understand them, Ariane whispered. I did, he admitted. Doesn't mean I always believe it. She leaned in and kissed him human. Custom, licery curiosity, a new system being learned in real time. The council disapproved, of course. A human partner was not forbidden, but irregular. They worried about bias, about perception. Ariane responded with calm ferocity. Her effectiveness had grown. Her understanding had deepened. Connection with the people affected by policy was not weakness, it was competence sharpened into empathy. 8 days later, the council issued a modified post, permanent liaison status in the Kepler region. Broad autonomy, reduced travel. Ariane suspected the council hoped the arrangement would fail. She intended to disappoint them when she returned. To the Halden compound, Jace tackled her legs like a rocket. Ari, you're back. Dad said you would, but you were gone forever. It was 34 days. Ariane said, smiling. That's basically forever, Jace insisted, dragging her toward the shop. Come on. I made something. On the workbench sat a small mechanical toy, a crimson replica of the Peregrine LX-11 built from scrap. Painted with earnest care, a tiny access panel revealed a slightly lopsided manifold. That one won't break, Jace said proudly. Dad made it stronger. Ariane stared, throat tightening. She looked up and found Elias watching her with a softness that made her chest ache. Thank you, she said, meaning more than the toy. Elias cleared his throat, then pulled a small box from his pocket. This is from me. I know your people have traditions, but in mine, this means something. Inside was a simple silver band set with a stone that glowed faintly blue. Jace helped pick it. Elias added quickly, It's cerulean, Jace said, because it matches you. Ariane extended her hand. Elias slid the ring into place, with hands that shook only a little. Then she pulled him into an embrace, pressing her forehead to his illusory gesture of deep connection. I accept, she whispered, but understand illusory bonds are permanent. Elias smiled, breath trembling. Sounds like a feature, not a bug. Ariane laughed fully, freely, and it startled her with its own brightness. Their wedding came months later beneath the amber sky and Cyrodiil's watching rings. Ariane wore iridescent bondrobes that shifted with her emotions, cycling through colors of joy. Elias wore his best suit, which Jace declared fancy, but weird. The guests were a strange constellation: settlement mechanics, trade delegates, a few Concord representatives who had learned to respect Ariane's unconventional choices, and Miss Relhu's irrigation drones now behaved. Jace carried the rings with solemn seriousness and also served as interpreter. The forehead thing is like a hug, he explained loudly, but with your feelings. The linking was adapted for a human partner. Ariane pressed her palm to Elias's chest, feeling his heartbeat. He could not receive her emotions the way a illusory could, but he promised to learn her patterns anyway, to notice her silences, her fatigue, her need for space, her joy. With this bond, Ariane vowed, I declare permanence through time, through distance, through whatever comes. Elias blinked at the efficient. I'm supposed to say I do now, right? Because I do. Very much. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Ariane kissed him, and cheers rose, some loud and human, some restrained. And Lycery, all honest, a year after, their daughter arrived small, improbable, radiant. The doctors called it statistically unlikely. Ariane called it miraculous. The baby had Ariane's blue-tinged skin and Elias's grey eyes, and a shimmer in the light that belonged to neither world entirely. Jace hovered at the doorway, suddenly cautious. She's tiny, he whispered. She will grow, Ariane said, placing warmth into every syllable. Is she going to be blue like you or regular like me and Dad? Somewhat blue, Ariane answered, and wholly herself. Jace considered this with the seriousness of a child deciding the laws of the universe. Can I hold her? Elias guided him carefully, showing him how to support her head. When the baby curled her fingers round Jace's thumb, his expression turned fierce with protectiveness. I'm going to teach her about ships, he declared, and tools. And I'll make sure nobody's mean to her because she's different. Ariane's heart clenched. She's my sister, Jace added, as if no further explanation was required. Family takes care of family. Ariane met Elias's eyes over their children's heads. He wore the same quiet smile he'd worn the first night her ship failed, and her life began to reroute. She had once believed her purpose was diplomacy, alone treaties, summits, councils, and she still served, still worked to stitch the species into something stable. But now her purpose had expanded. It lived in a workshop surrounded by resurrected machines, in a man who repaired what he could, because repair was hope made physical, in a boy who had walked into the desert with absolute faith and offered his hand like salvation, in a daughter who existed in defiance of probability. Jace looked up, grinning. Ari, remember when you thought your ship breaking was bad? Ariane smiled, tears bright in her eyes. I remember. It wasn't, Jace said, utterly certain. It was the best thing, because Dad fixed it. Ariane kissed his forehead warm, uncomplicated love washing through her. Yes, she agreed softly. He did. And somehow, piece by piece, they had fixed everything else too.